The night I finally understood my marriage, my wife was crying so hard she couldn't finish her sentences. She was shaking, gasping, and then the phone rang. In the space of a single ring, maybe 3 seconds, the crying stopped. Her voice leveled out, and she said, "Oh, hi, no, nothing, we're just finishing dinner." She talked for 10 minutes, warm, steady, laughing at something her sister said. Then she hung up, turned back to me, and the storm resumed exactly where it had left off. Same tears, same accusations, as if someone had pressed pause and then pressed play. For 20 years, I told myself I didn't see what I saw, because I only knew 2 possible explanations for that moment, and both of them were wrong. Welcome to Entangled in Chaos. Understand the chaos, break the pattern. Let me take you inside the house first. The phone call only makes sense if you understand the weather system it happened in. For most of my marriage, I was a meteorologist, not by profession, by survival. Every morning I took a reading, her footsteps on the stairs, the way she set her coffee cup down, whether she said good morning or just exhaled. By the time she reached the kitchen, I had a forecast, and the forecast determined everything: what I could say, what I could ask, and what had to wait for a better front. Certain topics were storm systems all by themselves. Money, decisions she hadn't been consulted on. But the most reliable trigger, the one I learned last and paid for most, was anything that looked like me having a life outside the house. A weekend with my brother, a class, dinner with an old friend. If it was mine and it was separate, it was a threat. And here's what you need to understand, because everything in this video depends on it. Her reactions were not theater. When she fell apart, she fell apart. Real tears, real shaking. Sometimes she'd hyperventilate until she couldn't speak. I've held her through episodes that frightened me, a person drowning in her own nervous system. Anyone who says she's just faking it has never stood in that room. It was real. But something else was also real, and it took me 20 years and 1 phone call and 1 question from my son to see it. The episodes had a shape. They started when a topic she didn't like entered the room. They escalated when I held my ground, tears first, then the accusations, "You don't care about this family. I can't believe you do this to me." Then the physical symptoms, and if I still hadn't surrendered, the long collapse, days when she moved through the house like a casualty, and the silence itself became a room I had to live in. And the episodes had an ending. They ended when I gave in. Not always immediately, but reliably. I'd cancel the weekend, drop the class, reschedule my friend for a someday that never came, and within hours, sometimes minutes, the weather cleared. She'd make dinner, touch my shoulder as she walked past. The house would exhale. I told myself that was love. I had a whole vocabulary for it, picking my battles, keeping the peace. It's not worth it. What I was actually doing, I couldn't see yet. Our son grew up inside that weather system, and children raised by meteorologists become meteorologists. By 6, he was reading the room, going quiet at the right moments, disappearing upstairs when the barometer dropped, learning that his needs were negotiable and her moods were not. He left home the way you leave a building during a fire drill, calmly, quickly, without looking back more than he had to. He was in his late 20s the night everything cracked open. He was visiting for the weekend. Over dinner, I mentioned, carefully, the way you mention things in a minefield, that I planned to drive out and help my brother move the next month. 3 days of lifting boxes, that's all it was. I watched it start the way it always started, the fork set down a little too precisely, the quiet fine, then not fine, the tears, the trembling voice, the accusations arriving in their familiar order like a liturgy we knew by heart. Our son sat there watching, and I watched him watching, and felt the old shame of being witnessed. I didn't cancel the trip at the table, but we both knew I would. That was the script. Later, he walked me out to the driveway. It was dark, and he stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets, and then he asked me the question that changed everything. "Dad, Mom was on the phone with her aunt for an hour this afternoon, laughing, completely fine, and she's fine at her job. You've told me yourself, everyone there loves her. She handles pressure better than anyone." He paused. "Have you ever noticed she never falls apart at work, or at church, or in front of the neighbors?" He wasn't being cruel, his voice was almost gentle. "It's only ever us." I stood there with my keys in my hand, and a memory surfaced that I had spent years carefully not examining. A night, maybe a decade earlier, my wife mid-breakdown, sobbing, shaking, unable to breathe. The phone rang, and in 3 seconds she answered it in a voice you could have poured tea to. I had seen a drowning woman climb out of the water, take a phone call, and climb back in. And I had told myself for 10 years that I didn't see it. Here's where I have to pause the story. What my son handed me in that driveway wasn't an accusation, it was data. And that data breaks a false choice that keeps millions of people trapped. The false choice goes like this. Either the person is genuinely dysregulated, truly cannot control their emotions, in which case it's nobody's fault and you must absorb it forever. Or they're manipulating you, the tears are fake, the pain is a performance, the person you love is essentially a con artist. Two doors, sick or scheming. Most of us stand in front of them for years, unable to walk through either one. Door 1 condemns you to a life of managing someone else's weather. Door 2 requires you to call real pain fake, and you've seen the pain. So here is the reveal, and I want you to sit with it. Emotional dysregulation and control are not opposites. They can coexist in the same person, in the same episode, in the same tears. The storm can be completely genuine and still be steering the ship. Her overwhelm was real, and her overwhelm had a job. Until I could hold both truths at once, I couldn't understand anything that had happened in my house for 25 years. But how can something be uncontrollable and controlling at once? That question has a precise answer, and it isn't she's secretly plotting. It's something far more ordinary and far more human. Let's start with what emotional dysregulation actually is, in plain English. Every nervous system has what psychologists call a window of tolerance, a zone where you can feel strong emotions and still think, still choose your words, still remember the person in front of you is someone you love. Dysregulation is getting knocked out of that window. The thinking brain goes offline, the alarm system takes over. Flooding, they call it. In a flooded state, a person genuinely has reduced access to reason, empathy, and self-control. That's real physiology, not performance. Some people have a narrow window. Difficult childhoods, anxious temperaments, families where emotions were either explosive or forbidden, all of it can leave an adult who floods easily and recovers slowly. If that describes someone you love, their distress is not an act. But here's the piece nobody explains, and it's the hinge of this entire video. Regulation capacity is not fixed, it's contextual. The same nervous system that can't stay composed with you somehow manages it with a supervisor, a neighbor at the door, a sister on the phone. Watch what happens when a screaming match is interrupted by a doorbell. Watch composure arrive on demand. The cynical interpretation says, see, it was fake all along. But that's wrong, and if you go around calling real pain fake, you'll lose every argument and doubt yourself into the ground. The accurate interpretation, composure, is expensive. The nervous system, like every system in nature, spends effort where the environment demands it and saves it where it doesn't. Her boss demands regulation, so regulation appears. The neighbor at the door demands it, so it appears. Home stopped demanding it decades ago, not because we were weak, because of the second concept you need, the one that explains almost everything. It's called reinforcement, and it's the oldest law in psychology. Behavior that works gets repeated, not behavior that's planned, not behavior that's chosen, behavior that works. Nobody drafts a strategy that says, I will hyperventilate until he cancels the trip. It operates the way all learning operates, silently beneath awareness. An overwhelmed person melts down, the topic vanishes, the plan gets canceled, someone apologizes for something that wasn't wrong. The nervous system takes a quiet note that worked, no memo, no decision. But the next time a threat appears, the meltdown arrives a little faster, a little bigger, a little more reliably. Run that loop 10,000 times over 25 years, and you get exactly the marriage I was living in. Genuine dysregulation, shaped by genuine reinforcement, into a genuine instrument of control, operated by a person who, in the moment, honestly experiences herself as a victim of her own emotions. She wasn't lying when she said, I can't help it. In the flooded moment, she couldn't. What neither of us could see was that can't had a hidden clause. can't with you because with you, it has never had to. And that's where I come into the story. Because reinforcement requires a reinforcer, and for 25 years, that was me. Family systems theory describes how a household organizes around its most volatile member the way a solar system organizes around its heaviest star. Everyone else's orbit bends. I became the regulator of a nervous system that wasn't mine, forecasting moods, pre-screening topics, sanding the edges off reality before it reached her. I called it keeping the peace. But every cancellation, every apology I didn't owe was a coin fed into the machine. My peacekeeping wasn't neutral. It was training. I was teaching her nervous system, one capitulation at a time, that the storm works. And our son, he was the collateral curriculum. Children in these homes learn that the biggest emotion in the room makes the rules, and everyone else's job is to shrink. Some grow up and repeat the storm. Others, like my son, grow up fluent in appeasement, scanning every room for weather. Neither gets to just be a person. The Stoics had a phrase for the exit, and it's 2,000 years old. You cannot control the storm, you can only control the ship. I spent decades trying to control her weather, preventing it, predicting it, appeasing it. The turn in my life came when I finally accepted that her regulation was her responsibility, and my responses were mine, not coldly, not punitively, just accurately. So let's go back to that driveway, my keys in my hand, my son's question hanging in the dark. Once you understand contextual regulation and reinforcement, every scene of the story changes its meaning. The phone call all those years ago, the 3-second recovery, the cheerful 10 minutes, the seamless return to the storm was never evidence that her pain was fake. It was evidence that her regulation was selective, which is a different thing entirely. Her sister's voice demanded composure, so composure came. My presence demanded nothing, so nothing came. I hadn't witnessed a con. I'd witnessed a nervous system doing what 20 years of consequences had taught it to do. The canceled weekends weren't kindness. They were deposits. Every trip I abandoned made the next meltdown more likely, not less, because I was paying the storm to return. And the accusations, "You don't care about this family," weren't claims to be debated. They were levers, not consciously designed, but levers all the same, pulled because pulling them had always worked. I did go help my brother move, by the way, 3 days of boxes and bad pizza. The forecast before I left was apocalyptic, the biggest escalation I'd seen in years, which is exactly what the psychology predicts. When a behavior that has always worked suddenly stops working, it gets louder before it fades. Psychologists call it an extinction burst. Expect it. Don't mistake it for proof that you're wrong. I stayed calm, I stayed kind, and I went. The house did not burn down, and 2 weeks later, something almost unbearably sad happened. She brought up the trip at dinner casually and asked how my brother's new place was, like weather that had moved through. That's when I understood the storms were never as permanent as they felt. They had simply never been allowed to end on their own. So here's the test I promised you. 3 questions. Notice what they don't ask, whether the emotions are real. That question kept you stuck. These ask what the emotions do. Question 1, the audience test. Does the intensity change depending on who's watching? Can they hold it together for a boss, a stranger, a doorbell, and only lose it with you? Total dysregulation that respects an audience isn't total. It's targeted not necessarily by intent, but by learning. If the storm has a guest list, the storm has a function. Question 2, the outcome test. Follow the episodes to their endings. Do the storms reliably conclude with them getting the outcome they wanted? The topic dropped, the plan canceled, the boundary erased, you apologizing. 1 or 2 coincidences mean nothing. But if the meltdowns have a win rate across years, you're not looking at random weather. You're looking at something that works, and things that work get repeated. Question 3, the repair test. This one matters most. After the storm passes, what happens? A person who is dysregulated but not controlling will eventually circle back with some version of, "I was out of line, that must have been hard for you. How do we handle this differently?" Imperfectly, maybe. But there's curiosity, ownership, repair. A person locked in the control pattern does the opposite. The history gets rewritten, the episode becomes your fault, and raising it later is treated as an attack. No repair ever is a pattern, not a bad day. If you answered yes to all 3, here's what it means and what it doesn't. It doesn't mean the person is evil, faking, or beyond change. It means real dysregulation has been trained into a control pattern, very possibly with your unintentional help. Which is good news because training runs in both directions. So what do you change? First, retire the courtroom. Stop trying to rule on real or fake. You will never win that trial, and you don't need to. Respond to the function, not the sincerity. Second, learn the steady exit, not a door slam, a sentence. I want to hear this, and I can't continue while I'm being yelled at. I'm taking 30 minutes, and then I'd like to finish. Then actually leave and actually come back. Leaving removes the payoff. Coming back proves you're not abandoning them, you're abandoning the storm. Third, the one people miss, return to the topic. In these households, storms don't just win arguments, they delete subjects. The trip never gets rebooked. The question never gets re-asked. Whole territories of your life get quietly annexed. So when things are calm, bring the topic back. I still plan to help my brother move. Let's talk about how to make that week easier. The message underneath is the medicine. Escalation no longer erases reality. Fourth, stop pre-managing. Notice your meteorologist habits, the forecasting, the topic screening, the rehearsed sentences, and gently retire them. You're allowed to say true things at normal volume without checking the weather first. And fifth, hold steady through the extinction burst. Louder before quieter is not failure, it's physics. One caveat: if escalation ever crosses into threats or danger, that's no longer a communication pattern. That's a safety issue, and it deserves outside help. I used to think the question of my marriage was, is her pain real? It took 25 years, one phone call, and one quiet question from my son to realize I'd been interrogating the wrong witness. Her pain was real, and her pain had a job. Both were true the whole time. The tears were genuine, and the tears had learned, through 10,000 small surrenders, most of them mine, exactly what they could accomplish. She wasn't a villain. I wasn't a fool. We were two people running a pattern so old neither of us could see we'd built it together. The test I gave you today isn't for prosecuting anyone. It's for something quieter, releasing you from the false choice between doubting real pain and obeying it. You can believe every tear and still refuse to be governed by them. Because in the end, the storm never trapped me. The forecast did. The years I spent watching the sky instead of living my life. You can't control their weather, you never could, but the ship was always yours. If this found you where you live, consider subscribing. Every week, we take one more pattern out of the shadows, understand the chaos, break the pattern.